The American offensive against the Islamic State began. U.S. aircraft strike targets near Baghdad as Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel testifies before the Senate Armed Services Committee on the strategy. Amid ongoing crisis, Ukraine moves to give limited self-rule to the separatist East while the country signs a landmark pact with the European Union. Ebola moves into U.S. focus. President Barack Obama travels to the CDC to meet on the rapid spread of the virus. The U.S. will commit $500 million and 3,000 personnel to help combat it in West Africa.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening. In focus today, the American strategy against the Islamic State as the U.S. launched airstrikes near Baghdad for the first time as part of the offensive against IS. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel and the military's top officer Martin Dempsey testified in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, outlining and defending the strategy. The U.S. plans to hit the terror groups in strongholds in Syria and Iraq and could even send advisors into combat alongside Iraqi troops. Also today, Al-Qaeda branches called for a united jihad against the U.S.-led coalition. We will go tonight to our correspondents near the Syrian border, Eli Ochenberg, Lea Bardugo, and Sami Abu Diab, all of them from our I-24 News 3 channels. But first, let's take a look back.
Destroying ISIL will require more than military efforts alone. It will require political progress in the region and effective partners on the ground in Iraq and Syria.
Our military actions must be part of a whole-of-government effort that works to disrupt ISIL financing, interdict the movement of foreign fighters across borders, and undermine the ISIL message.
And with me on set is Barbara Opel Rome, Israel Bureau Chief Defense News. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also former Israeli ambassador to Egypt, Yitzhak Lebanon. Ambassador Lebanon, thank you very much for coming. So really, the United States is attacking from the air. Can you demolish IS from the air?
All right. This has been a very controversial and parochial issue for many decades now. And indeed, air power and air power-based strategy has proven itself to limited effect back in Kosovo in the 1999 timeframe. In this particular case, Lucy, if the mission is to degrade and erode these terrorist forces of the Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria and to prevent their movement from spreading, yes, it can be accomplished by the air. If the mission is, as the president said, not only to degrade but to destroy and to uproot them from towns that they have already taken hold of, that's going to require some boots on the ground, despite the president's desire to do so. And just one other thing I must say, this air power strategy that the commander of Central Command will be briefing the president on tomorrow in Tampa, it was described not as being one of shock and awe, but a U.S. Air Force general from Washington told me today that it will have to be a thunderstorm and not a drizzle in order to be effective.
Yeah, I mean, just, to clarify the situation, there will be ground operations. The only thing that the United States, I am not going to send my troops into the ground.
Exactly what I wanted to say. They are going to create some kind of a strategy because from what we're hearing right now, the Arab countries decided not to really hurry in and put their soldiers on the ground.
This morning, the ground operation started. Peshmerga, the Kurds, they capture a village nearby Mosul, on their way to Mosul. The Iraqi artillery, they have killed 15. So you have soldiers on the ground and fighting. The only thing is that the United States and the West say we are not going at this stage send any boots, to the ground. We are not going to send our forces or the infantry. We are going to help with the airstrikes, which is very helpful. This is for the first time that we saw that they are striking nearby Baghdad. I never thought, that we have Daesh or the ISIS or the Islamic State nearby Baghdad. This is the first time that we heard that.
It's not only the first time. It feels like they're fighting like, Casper. It's something that you cannot touch. You cannot see them. You only see their videos. You cannot see them on the ground if you don't face it face to face, because it just reminds me a little bit of the Second Lebanon War here, because when IDF forces got in and they said, okay, it felt like we're fighting ghosts.
Listen, that is the nature of asymmetric warfare and counter-terror operations, but the U.S. has a lot of experience in this area. And indeed, whenever there will be movement, and and they obviously have some targets to strike in terms of command centers and logistic depots and what have you. They've taken over, they've seized military hardware. So to prevent them from this military hardware, to prevent them from transferring this hardware and to expand their cross-border presence, that can be done through persistent 24/7 coverage and targeting from the air. You can, to a limited extent, control what's happening on the ground from the air. But again, as I said, to uproot them, that's going to require a tough slog.
Let's see, Chai Ben-Ari just took a look and has more on the testimony of U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel. Let's see it.
As the Obama administration begins to implement its anti-IS strategy on the ground in Iraq, attention Tuesday turned to Capitol Hill, where officials attempted, under a cloud of public protest, to persuade Congress to authorize the administration's plan to combat the Islamic State.
With coalition partners and contributions, we will begin building a force of vetted, trained, moderate Syrians to take on ISIL in Syria.
The U.S. is looking to train over 5,000 fighters in phases over the course of a year at a facility located in Saudi Arabia. The Syrian rebels are supposed to conduct the fighting against IS forces in Syria.
We are now recruiting these young men to go and fight in Syria against ISIL, but if they're attacked by Bashar Assad, we're not going to help them.
They will defend themselves, Senator.
Will we help them against Assad's error?
We will help them and we will support them.
The decision to train and arm the rebels represents something of a turnaround for Obama, who previously expressed skepticism about the idea.
We will monitor them closely to ensure that weapons do not fall into the hands of radical elements of the opposition, ISIL, the Syrian regime, or other extremist groups.
One Free Syrian Army commander was quoted saying that what the rebels truly need is better weaponry. There is support within the Pentagon for supplying the rebels with artillery, anti-tank rockets, and mortars, but it is doubtful that this kind of upgrade could be achieved within the limits of a $500 million aid package currently before Congress.
As these forces prove their effectiveness on the battlefield, we would be prepared to provide increasingly sophisticated types of assistance to the most trusted commanders in capable forces.
Meanwhile, the aerial campaign against IS is in full swing, with U.S. airstrikes conducted in support of offensive Iraqi ground operations hitting jihadist forces near Baghdad. In Syria, the Islamic State boasted it had shot down a regime fighter jet which crashed in the IS stronghold of Raqqa. In an ironic twist, the Assad regime and the West now find themselves fighting a common enemy, but it remains difficult to foresee exactly how this will affect relations between the two.
Exactly this, how this is going to affect the relationship, let's say, between all the countries. Because alongside the army, let's say, operation, you will have to do some diplomatic efforts. And it seems that John Kerry just traveled around the Middle East, and his travel didn't, let's say, was a really big success.
Why?
Because when the Arab countries are saying, okay, we're not in a hurry to get in, we are not going to help because we have other strategy, we have other interests, we are looking for something else. So maybe
look, I think that
they see something that the United States for a long time is not seeing.
Lucy, I think that the United States have succeeded to set up, this coalition. I would say even successfully. You have 30 countries, Europeans and Arab countries.
But what exactly are they going to do,
Wait a minute.
other than
this
lip
is
service?
why this is why they met in Paris in closed doors, and they have decided to divide the task of each one of them. Definitely within this coalition, you have some Arab countries who have their own interest. I will give you one or two. Egypt, for instance, they say, look, we would like to join this coalition, but under the condition that the fight will be not against the IS or Daesh or the ISIS, but all terrorist organizations, meaning
The Muslim Brotherhood.
the Muslim Brotherhood and Beit al-Maqdis in Sinai. The Iraqi tribes, for instance, they say, look, we are ready to join in the ground to fight against ISIS if you will take also, those elements insinuating that those are the Shiites, in Iraq. Definitely in the coalition they have different, let's say, interests, but it exists. And they start to work, and there is a division of each country, intelligence, logistics, ground.
What you're saying is really unprecedented, because maybe for the first time the Islamic world, let's say, woke up and said, okay, this Sunni Islamic world woke up and say, okay, this is a big threat to us. This is a big threat to, this is not, again, something that we can just say, okay, it doesn't happen. But again, where is this strategy going? Where?
And remember that the Shiite Iranian and the Bashar al-Assad regime and Hezbollah, for that matter, are also in this mix, ostensibly fighting a common enemy.
Where is Iran in this? Where is Iran supposed to get into
Officially
this? Because
out,
if we're
on the ground in.
Which means?
Which means, they are fighting also for their own interest, and the Americans are closing their eyes. But officially, they are not in the coalition.
They will gain from any achievements, and they don't have to suffer any of the setbacks.
And they're not going to gain anything back?
And
they're not asking for anything
and
back?
they might gain a little bit more understanding and flexibility in the ongoing nuclear talks that are scheduled to resume once again next week. It's a very dismal picture.
I'm not sure, Barbara. The issue of the nuclear is completely different course. I don't
we can say that, and we can put up a Chinese firewall.
I don't think that the Iranians will get from the American any reduction.
But when you're saying that the Sunni world is waking up, it means that when the Sunni world right now is in a big fight with the Shiite. We know that Iran is, let's say, to say the least, not in a peaceful time with the Sunni. So how come our world is not waking up also against Iran and asking for some kind of an umbrella to stop Iran and block Iran?
The American and the West, because we have to include the West also. I mean, France and England and etc. They reach a conclusion, that they have. They need the support of the Sunni Muslim world in front of the Shiite. Because the penetration of Iran in Iraq with Maliki, which they persecuted the Sunnite and the tribes, etc., and they brought Iraq into the brink of, the total collapse. So the Americans changed course. And they have succeeded by setting up this coalition, and even Qatar changed course. By sending out from their own 7 people from Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, they asked him to leave, and they left. They left to Turkey. Now there are some news, probably Mashal or others, that are giving, instructions to Al Jazeera network to change, the tone against Egypt and the Arab Gulf, etc.
Qatar is actually a pivotal player here, and it's a wild card because by far the largest U.S. Air Force base in this region is in Qatar. And without this frontline support, there are other bases. There's a huge UAV, an unmanned drone base in Kuwait, and there's also one in the UAE, and there's also a special operations base in Jordan. But they are truly what you said, the wild card, and it remains to be seen if they will be a source for good or bad.
The hardcore in my mind is, the problem is Turkey and Russia, Syria, Iran. Because they say, if the Americans are going to hit inside Syria without the acquiescence or the consent of the Syrians, we are going to consider it as, an act of belligerency.
How absurd for Putin to waive international law for intervening in...
Never mind, but we have to take into account that the Russians and the Iranians have set up a very good, let's say, air defense in Syria.
Yes.
They do have.
Who do you think feels
Yes.
worse right now? Do you think that the United States feels really bad that it armed, that it gave money and closed deals with Qatar? Or Qatar feels really bad about giving so much power to extreme Sunnis?
The U.S. is so hard-pressed to justify all of the expense that it has laid out in this region for more than a decade. I mean, just in Iraq, for goodness sake, we heard the clip from Senator John McCain, and he asked the relevant question: what happens if the coalition fighting on to uproot and destroy ISIS will be attacked by Assad's forces, backed by Iran, backed by Russia, with including Hezbollah? What happens then? These devil is in the details, and they have yet to be answered. Already, the United States has spent only on military arming and training $35 billion over the past decade in Iraq on the most advanced frontline systems. And what did they do at the first real clear and present threat? They hightailed it. They ran. So how do you expect to pour more artillery and heavy weaponry into this amorphous, unidentified group of rebels to fight this anti-ISIS strategy? Again, I would
remind you the invasion to Iraq?
I was going to say that
in March 2003. Yes.
And relying, I think that most of the reliance should be on the coalition air power, where you can, maintain the rules of the game.
Look, in my mind, if the Americans will reach the conclusion that they have to strike inside Syria, and they have to do it, I think they will not hesitate to do it. Look, in the fight with Putin, in the region, Putin is not the strong guy in the Middle East. He's strong in Ukraine.
But he can make so much trouble. What happens, for example,
What
happens if the U.S. Or the coalition air forces have to strike Russian interests in the port Tartus that they have in Syria?
I don't think that
or
America will go so
Russian
far.
SAM, surface-to-air missiles. What happens? It's
No,
such
this is not what the Americans are looking for. They are looking after the IS, which they are, or Daesh or ISIS in Syria,
Yes.
exactly like they did it this morning with 6 cars near Baghdad. This is what the strike. It was not in installations. It was not in airport. It was 6
obviously,
cars.
but in the fog of war, things happen,
I
and
think that American will be cautious, really, not to bring Putin, into a kind of a brinkmanship. But if need will be, and they will see that there are some people from the IS in Syria, those terrorists, I think they will not hesitate to strike.
I'm trying to look. It seems like when the Americans got into Iraq and they didn't know that there's this big fight between Sunni and Shiite, and now it seems that I'm watching Chalk Cable and I'm talking, or they did, and I'm watching the answers that I will say it out loud. They don't understand. They don't understand the ground. They don't understand what is happening. They don't understand the culture. They just know that right now, wow, IS, because for me it seems like a really big campaign. IS right now is the new cool thing that we need to take care of, and this is a huge thing all over the world. So
listen, there is a lot of emotion, and when Vice President Joe Biden said that we're going to pursue them to the gates of hell, I mean, he was reacting emotionally to these gruesome...
It's like hearing Benjamin Netanyahu saying we're going to demolish Hamas and we're going to destroy them and we're going to wipe them and we're going to wipe the terror from the Gaza Strip.
But he's Joe Biden. When you look at the President of the United States, and I know that he has such a bad reputation here in Israel and in this region as leading from behind, but quite frankly, this president, his motto, don't do stupid things. He does not want to overstep and act precipitously. And in fact, for many, many months, almost a year, he has been holding off barking dogs like Senator John McCain because he so closely wants to vet who will receive American weapons. He does want to act, and I truly hope and will give him the benefit of the doubt that there will be a clearly defined strategy down to the nitty-bitty details. He is cautious, and when he does act, he has proven that he can be a rather successful force against terrorism. Let's open.
This is not the impression that you have here.
Before you will continue about the impression that you have on it, let's go to our I-24 News correspondent, Eli Ochenberg, who's standing near this Syrian border here. Eli, good evening. So, you know, it's just a little bit of a reminder. We remember 2006, the Second Lebanon War. It seems that, or even this recent operation, when a lot of voices said that Israel got into the Gaza Strip with no strategy whatsoever. And it seems also, again, that we feel that the Americans are getting in with no strategy fighting the IS.
Yes, well, Lucy, the eyes of the world are, of course, carried now towards the IS offensive, but the situation in Syria is not less interesting. First of all, the U.S. administration have already sent a very clear message to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad that any attempt of all kind to sabotage the U.S. aerial attacks in Syria will be answered with a fierce full comeback. So this is a ground rule for the upcoming weeks at least. But as said, the situation in Syria is still ongoing. There's a non-stop civil war there, and we have terror groups that are not less serious than IS. We're talking about Al-Qaeda, we're talking about Jabhat al-Nusra. This is the group that kidnapped the UN peacekeepers. So the situation in Syria has to be monitored not less seriously than the IS situation. And by the way, the UN peacekeepers story, hundreds of UN troops went out of Syrian territory and passed to Israeli territories in the last day, following the constant fear that the situation in Syria will get more and more intense, and the UN troops have left there. And the current situation now is that we only have 2 UN compounds left in Syria, and that means that the civil war is not monitored by the UN anymore. So again, as said, the civil war in Syria is ongoing non-stop, and the IS situation, as serious as it may be, should not draw the complete attention from the civil war there. And of course, Israel is in the front line, and the IDF is closely watching every single move of the rebels and Assad's military right along the Israel-Syria border. Hopefully there will be no further leaks, but it is possible. So the entire area is extremely heated up now, and a lot of threats of all kinds. Definitely something both the IDF and the UN should closely follow.
Yes, Eli Ochenberg, thank you very, very much for this. Let's put Israel into the equation and how Israel is going right now. Israel is sitting on the fence and, let's say, watching the world dealing with the big issue, with this big thing. But like Eli Ochenberg said, the Syrian civil war is leaking, and we feel it here. We hear it here.
And Israel has a policy of responding to errant fire.
How is Israel going to react to this new coalition that it's not only Israel against Syria, it's not only Israel against, let's say, the rebels or the Syrian army or Hezbollah, it's Israel against a bigger coalition that needs to coordinate right now diplomatically and militarily.
I want to let the ambassador speak on the diplomatic front, but Defense News reported today that there is in fact an agreement, a diplomatic defense agreement between the U.S. and Israel that was actually signed more than a year ago as part of the Pentagon's planning process, if you remember, in the run-up to prospective airstrikes against Assad for his illegal use of chemical weapons. And this agreement will provide deconfliction. It will provide coordination so that if Israel, for its own reasons, as Eli Ochenberg mentioned, if Israel, for its own reasons, must operate in the same domain and share the airspace with U.S. and coalition air forces, this agreement that has been on the shelf for more than a year is now being dusted off, and it can provide a healthy safety mechanism for proper coordination and deconfliction.
Yeah.
Look, I think that the situation is quite clear. We are not part officially of that coalition. And I think it's wise not to be in. I mean, obviously, this is a coalition with the Arab and the Muslim countries. But we are fully supportive of that. And I think that the Prime Minister yesterday or the day before yesterday said this quite clearly. We are in favor of that coalition, and we are in favor of fighting IS and all other organizations. In this regard, we are also supportive of the Egyptian position that all terrorist organizations will have to fight. We can help indirectly. Intelligence, logistics, things that we have to coordinate, with the American or the West or the French later on if they would strike in Syria.
The vetting process, Israel, has been very helpful
so
for months.
there is, a lot of things that we can do, but the primary concern of Israel is what we have on our borders. In the south, we know that we have Beit al-Maqdis terrorist organizations who are from Al-Qaeda, and now they shifted to IS because they beheaded 8 people, 8 Egyptians. We have Hezbollah who start, lately to come close to the border and to show, look, people, I'm here, don't forget. And we have Jabhat al-Nusra, which belonged to Al-Qaeda just in Quneitra. 100 meters from the border. So we do have our own problems, and I think that the United States understand this very well, that we have to deal first with our problems. This doesn't mean that we are not supportive of the coalition.
So we asked today the Israelis on the street, should the U.S. cooperate with Assad against IS? Let's see what they had to say.
Everyone must be united against terror, Iraq, Syria, whoever, and proceed towards a safer, less radical world.
There's no reason that the world's largest democracy, as they purport to be, will collaborate with a cruel dictator who attacks his own people with chemical and conventional weapons.
In view of the danger the Islamic State poses, I think that a collaboration with everyone is needed. It might also bring us back to negotiations.
I think that a coalition with evil and corrupt leaders might lead to good results in the short term, but on the long term, it's a wrong alliance that mustn't exist.
We have just 1 minute, and I want to ask you, we heard that we always used to hear Benjamin Netanyahu say, if Israel needs to defend itself, it will, concerning the Iranian issue. Can Benjamin Netanyahu still say that?
He says it. He says it.
With everything that is happening right now?
There's a very high doubt worldwide that he can actually make good on those words.
He asked for an extra budget, and I think it's very clear that he intends to do it.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here. Thank you very much for being with me in this part. We are going for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will be back for the rest of the news. Ukraine, Israel, and sports and culture. Don't go in. The American offensive against the Islamic State begins. U.S. aircraft strike targets near Baghdad as Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel testifies before the Senate Armed Services Committee on the strategy. Amid ongoing crisis, Ukraine moves to give limited self-rule to the separatist East, while the country signs a landmark pact with the European Union. Ebola moves into U.S. focus. President Barack Obama travels to the CDC to meet on the rapid spread of the virus. The U.S. will commit $500 million and 3,000 personnel to help combat it in West Africa. Before we are just continuing this part, the IDF just approved and right now that a rocket fell and was fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel and fell in Israeli territories. Of course, we will continue updating you about this new event. But let's go to the Ukraine. 2 dramatic events took place in Ukraine today as the country entered a European Union pact despite Russian opposition. The Ukrainian parliament also passed a law offering independence to territories held by Russian rebels, rising fears of a future frozen conflict. Ayman Siksik follows the new developments in the war-torn country.
In Ukraine Tuesday, a landmark pact was signed that may bring the country one step closer to the European Union. Lawmakers in the Ukrainian and European parliaments ratified an EU political and economic association agreement to increase political and economic ties with the 28-member European Union. The agreement offers a cooperative framework in areas such as energy, visas, foreign policy, and free trade deals.
A vote for today's ratification is a choice of the civilization for Ukraine. We are correcting a mistake that was made 350 years ago. Ukraine is Europe. That's what the Ukraine people said and did. The signature of the whole Ukraine is under this agreement.
At the same time, a major shift is taking place inside Ukraine. President Petro Poroshenko offered limited self-rule to the country's separatist east under the terms of a peace plan with Russia. The proposal includes immunity from criminal prosecution for participants in the recent attack on Donetsk airport and allows the heavily armed rebels in the Lugansk region to set up their own police force and hold local elections in November. The newly signed EU agreement is the first sign of hope the war-torn country has seen in months. It was the rejection of the same deal by the Kremlin in November that triggered pro-EU protests in Kiev and led to the current riots in Ukraine. But as the Ukrainian president attempts to maneuver between the country's opposing sides, the internal rift between the two is at risk of growing deeper.
And with me right now on set is Paula Sliar, Bureau Chief for Russia Today. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. So, Paula, can we say that this decision today is kind of a win to Putin?
Look, I don't think the Russian president is going to go that far because the Russian policy has always been to say that they're not directly involved in what is happening on the ground. I think many of the pro-Russian fighters will feel that it's a step in the right direction. Essentially, what you have is the two regions of Lugansk and Donetsk that are being given some kind of special status. But having said that, there is at least the leader of one of those regions who's rejected this and said it is not for the Kiev government to say what kind of status we have. What is unclear at this stage is what exactly special status means. We know that they've been given special status in some parts of the region, but what does that mean for other parts? And the big question, of course, is what does this mean for the future? Are we looking at the regions separating from the Kiev government? Are we looking at them joining with Russia? Are we looking at some kind of federalization? None of that has been answered, but certainly it is one step.
Exactly what is this special status that they are talking about?
Well, no one actually knows. What essentially has happened in these regions, which call themselves Novorossiya, was that they held a referendum, and the referendum stated that they wanted to be separated from Ukraine. Again, it's not clear exactly in how this will play out and in what criteria it will lead to, but certainly it means that they want to have some kind of separation from the rest of Ukraine. We know, for example, that they're introducing the ruble, so they'll already have the Russian currency in part of eastern Ukraine, in inverted commas, eastern Ukraine. So the special status is, your guess is as good as mine, but it certainly does set the parameter and set the stage that ultimately you could look at further separation from the Kiev government of these two regions.
So are we heading towards a permanent agreement? Are we heading to this so-called ceasefire that they were talking about? Is it something that going to create some kind of a resolution?
I think it's still too soon to say that. I think if you look at the situation on the ground, there is a ceasefire in place, and I just returned from Ukraine 4 days ago. But if you talk to people on the ground, most people don't think the ceasefire is going to hold, and there are already violations. In fact, many people on the ground believe that the fighting is going to continue for anything from 1 to 5 years from now. So special status or not special status, and what is agreed or voted on in the government in Kiev isn't necessarily being played out on the streets of eastern Ukraine. There's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of anger. You have tens of thousands of people who are now returning home. They were displaced by 5 months of fighting. They're finding homes in ruins. You can just imagine the kind of anguish on the streets.
Sounds familiar a little bit.
It sounds very familiar. Stories repeat themselves all around the world.
All around the world, and sometimes we think that we are really, really special. Paula Sliar, thank you very much for this.
Thank you for having me.
And while the Ukrainian parliament members were debating outside of the parliament building, a group of men grabbed a parliament deputy, Vitaly Zuharovsky, and threw him into the rubbish bin. Zuharovsky, once a member of former ousted President Viktor Yanukovych's party, was walking past the crowds outside the parliament when he was grabbed. The men held him down in the dumpster, poured water on him, and threw his briefcase and tires on him. Yes, definitely something not usual. The battle against the Ebola epidemic is shifting to the next level as the U.S. prepares to send 3,000 troops to Liberia to help the prevention and spread of the lethal virus. U.S. President Barack Obama headed to Center of Diseases Control and Prevention in Atlanta to meet on the issue. I-24 News reporter Uwe Shapiro has more.
While he's making efforts to build a coalition against the Islamic State, the American president found some time to deal with yet another crucial global threat, the Ebola epidemic. Obama arrived this afternoon at the Center of Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta to announce a dramatic increase in American involvement, 3,000 American troops to be sent to Liberia in order to fight the virus. It was also include over $500 million in defense spending. Earlier this month, Obama spoke directly to the people of West Africa, explaining how to deal with the disease.
Ebola is not spread through the air like the flu. You cannot get it from casual contact like sitting next to someone on a bus. You cannot get it from another person until they show the symptoms of the disease, like fever.
The current outbreak has cost the lives of at least 2,400 people, but experts predict that number may be much higher. The UN Security Council will hold an emergency meeting on the issue next Thursday.
We can contain this. We know how to do it, and we must avoid panic and fear. But our collective response to date has not been sufficient. We must move forward aggressively in a coordinated fashion and together.
It's not only West Africa causing concern. In Saudi Arabia, security forces are preparing for the upcoming Hajj celebration set for early October. On Monday, officials introduced a new screening program as some of the pilgrims are expected to arrive from Nigeria. So far, no medicine or vaccine has been available for the lethal disease. With poor hygiene and conditions in the infected areas, the American task may be difficult, at least if not more, than its other military operation.
Yes, and right now with me via Skype is Dr. Leslie Lobel, a leading Ebola vaccine researcher. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Mr. Lobel, do you think this new Obama plan going to work?
Well, it's better than nothing. To say it's enough, I don't think so. I think that it's going to require a lot more military personnel, a lot more money, a lot more time. But I think it's at least a good realization on the part of the U.S. government that something needs to be done and something needs to be done quickly.
How do you think that actually right now on the ground, let's say in one way or another, we can stop the Ebola virus from spreading?
Well, as I said before, the only way to really stop this now is actually to quarantine sick people and to actually close the borders of the countries where we have sick people. There's really no other way to stop it. If we do this, the disease will burn itself out. In the future, hopefully, we'll have therapeutics and vaccines, but right now, there's really nothing really available to treat patients or to stop the disease at the pharmaceutical level.
But if we are looking right now, what do the people need that have the virus? What do they need right now on the ground?
Well, they need, for the most part, intensive care. They need IV fluids. They need to be fed, to be provided with detailed health care and diagnostics. I think everything that they require is fairly simple. It's just that there are a lot of people that are sick, and it takes a lot to provide all of what these people need under the security or under the tight quarantine that it's going to be required.
Dr. Lobel, how did it deteriorate at this point?
Well, I don't think people have taken Ebola seriously or infectious diseases that seriously for a long time. And there have been a lot of other outbreaks in Africa of Ebola we've been following for many years. And they've been relatively small and contained. That's because the countries where they had the outbreaks had effective control over the populations. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is the perfect storm of Ebola virus, being that it's in countries where they have the least control over their populations, they have very poor infrastructure, and they really do need the help of the global community.
Yes, Dr. Leslie Lobel, thank you very, very much for this.
Thank you.
And opinions have been easy to come by on the U.S. strategy against the Islamic State and whether or not the administration has won at all. I-24 News correspondent Matthias Inbal sat down with a former lieutenant colonel in Israeli Air Force who explained the benefits and limits of air power.
3 years of airstrikes on Islamic State positions. This is the plan suggested by Barack Obama. And it's a plan doomed to failure, according to Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA. But is the plan proposed by the President of the United States realistic on a military level? That is the question we asked Ron Tira, a lieutenant colonel in the reserves of the Israeli Air Force. He's just completed his missions as airstrike coordinator during Operation Protective Edge in Gaza. His answer is equivocal.
I don't think it's realistic in military terms. Will ISIS adjust and change its appearance into something that air power is less effective against, which is moving into the urban areas and not looking like an army? And the second challenge is ISIS is only the symptom. If you run after one symptom and you don't deal with the underlying problem, a new symptom will emerge.
This former fighter pilot is perfectly aware of the difficulty in hitting targets in urban areas while avoiding collateral damage.
It would be foolish for ISIS to continue moving between towns on highways using high signature vehicles, and they'll be much wiser to move into the urban areas and use vehicles that look civilians. For the US Air Force, it is not a problem to drop a bomb on a target anywhere in the Middle East. The problem is knowing what is a target and how to kill the target without killing civilians around it.
According to Tira, human intelligence is essential. He believes that without a network of informers and agents inside Iraqi and Syrian villages, these strikes will have no effect in the long run.
It's extremely difficult to pursue from the air non-state actors operating in an urban environment. If you want to do that to the limited ability that you can do it, you need excellent human intelligence. You need a significant network of urban sources.
Tira thinks the Islamic State has been able to spread panic thanks to social networks. He also says the international community should not turn away from the main sponsor of terrorist organizations in the Middle East, Iran, and the threat of its nuclear capacities.
And as we mentioned a short while ago, the IDF confirmed a rocket from the Gaza Strip hit the Eshkol regional council in Israel's south, the first since the end of the last conflict in the Gaza Strip. And right now, joining me on the phone is our I-24 News analyst, Ali Waked. Good evening, Ali.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Ali, what is this? What is going on? Who launched this rocket that can lead to, let's say, a new deterioration in the situation?
No, for the moment, nobody is talking about a new deterioration. The security services of Hamas are investigating to try to know who was the organization that shot the rockets. Hamas officially, talking to us, denied any involvement in the shooting of rockets or any encouraging to other organizations to try to shoot rockets. According to the Hamas, they are not expecting any Israeli retaliation as part of the understanding that the two sides will keep the ceasefire in the coming days, the weeks. But Lucy, this is a first sign of the fact that there is a big frustration in the Gaza Strip from the fact that there is a ceasefire. The negotiations did not started yet in Cairo. The crossings with Egypt and with Israel are not working as the Palestinians expected. Salaries are not paid to the security men and civil servants of Hamas government, and all the signs show that if there is no serious and concrete progress in the talks that, according to Hamas, should restart by the end of this month, the situation can change, and then we can, yes, talk about risk of a deterioration.
You know, Ali, we've been talking a lot about today, and especially in the last few weeks, about IS and maybe the possibility when Israel was in that the IS is creating some kind of a cell in the Gaza Strip. Can this be a sign?
I don't know if IS is creating a cell, but there is no doubt, Lucy, that there is many Salafi and jihadist cells in the Gaza Strip that will be probably part of a campaign against the Islamic States. Already in the social media of the jihadist group in Gaza Strip and elsewhere, they are talking about new crusades against the Muslims, and that every Islamic organization should retaliate in case the international campaign will start against the Islamic State. But Hamas is willing not to be part of a regional escalation because of it's well aware that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to do a comparison between the Islamic State, between Daesh, and between Hamas. Hamas doesn't want to show that there are two centers of fight against terrorism, one in Iraq, Syria, and the other one in Gaza. This is why Hamas will try to do everything to try to reach any understanding that can allow the organization to show the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip that something has been moving since this ceasefire. But we know, Lucy, we saw what happened in former ceasefires in the past during the last war. Without a serious progress, the region and the Gaza Strip borders can be a stage for deterioration.
Yes, definitely. Ali Waqid, like we're saying, we'd love to say it here in the Middle East. Let's wait and see. Ali Waqid, thank you very much for this. Of course, we will continue updating about this current development. And let's stay in the same subject. While long-term Cairo ceasefire talks are still nowhere in sight, residents of the Israeli communities on the Gaza border are trying to recuperate from 8 straight weeks of Gaza-launched attacks. Many of them are tired, terrified, and angry by their government's inability to provide long-term protection. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev spoke to them.
Just 4 weeks ago, the Gaza periphery residents were living in a combat zone. Constant rocket and mortar fire, artillery shelling, and drones in the air. Entire communities shut down due to a detected tunnel or infiltration. Today, life is back to normal, or at least normal by the standards of this area.
Life was not normal here for the last 14 years. When you stand by a daycare and you see a bomb shelter, that's not normal. I think our motto became that we are living a normal life in an abnormal situation.
According to the IDF count, more than 1,400 rockets and mortars landed in the Gaza envelope, which includes the town of Sderot and dozens of smaller communities within 7 kilometers of the border. Some of the homes are just a few hundred meters from the border, meaning the Iron Dome system isn't very useful, and the mortars fall so quickly there is little time to run. Throughout the operation, many fled their homes and relocated to safer parts of the country. All 4 civilian victims of the operation, including 4-year-old Daniel Tragerman, came from the region. After the operation, the government announced a $400 million aid package, but that has yet to be finalized. Moreover, the fate of Cairo long-term truce talks is unknown, and Hamas remains a looming threat.
History showed us that the intervals between the conflicts are getting shorter and the violence is getting much, much bigger.
Several cabinet ministers sang along with the residents this weekend, but don't let the sound of music mislead you. Residents of the South don't have much faith in their leaders, and they're speaking up.
Everybody I talk to, and it doesn't matter if you are right-wing and if you are left-wing, we all understand that this government couldn't care less about the well-being of people here.
Some demand active defense solutions, others to pursue diplomacy, such as the Negev Future movement established following the operation.
Our main goal is to have an agreement. I don't know if it should be an agreement with Hamas or with the Arab world, but we want peace and quiet to this area, and we believe that peace cannot be achieved only by force.
They're considered the modern carriers of David Ben-Gurion's vision of settling the Negev. Their resilience is praised oftenly. But after 14 years of on and off war between Israel and Hamas, the last operation could turn out to be just one too many. Tal Shalev, I-24 News.
Yeah, let's hope that they know how to keep their promises like they know how to sing. Now to the economy. And with with me right now is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
It was a matter of time until Netflix will get to Europe.
Exactly. It's the largest video-on-demand American company. They're coming to Europe. They released actually the product yesterday to France. They're going to Switzerland, to Germany, to Austria. And basically, it's a huge powerhouse because they have $5 billion of sales. The valuation of Netflix is $29 billion. It's a huge company. So today, they're coming to Europe to take the European market.
So what does it mean for the European market, and what does it mean for Netflix?
Netflix, basically, they're offering a package of $6. You can have unlimited access to movies, to TV shows. So it's very important. They want to come to Europe. There is one issue in Europe, definitely in countries like France or Germany, because they're very touchy about the cultural exception, I would say. And today, if you're a media group in France, you have by law to finance the movies or TV shows. And Netflix had their headquarters in Luxembourg because they also didn't want to legally be bounded to finance, let's say, the movie financing in France. So there is an issue.
What can be the next phase for Netflix? Where are we going to see Netflix anytime soon here in the region?
In Israel, it will come eventually. You know, they came to the UK 3 years ago, to Scandinavian countries also 3 years ago. They already have $400 million of sales. Today, they're coming to continental Europe. We can expect within a couple of years to have Netflix in Israel.
Yes, Lionel Friedfeld, thank you very much for this. Let's wait for Netflix to come. Although we are living here in a movie. In 2 days, Scotland will decide whether or not to break from the United Kingdom. Recent polls show a first ever lead to Scottish independence campaigners who have now found an unexpected source of support. I-24 News correspondent Shahal Peled has more on the Scottish-Palestinian solidarity.
Bagpipers intensely rehearsing ahead of Scotland's historic vote for independence is an expected sight. But these musicians come from a small town in the Palestinian West Bank and support the Scottish independence campaigners out of solidarity and identification.
As a Palestinian, I live under occupation, and I know the suffering inflicted by the occupier. So we hope that the Scottish people will live free in a state and an independent entity.
Far from the tussle over Scotland's future, pipers and stick-twirling drummers from the predominantly Christian town of Bet Jala burst into action as local scout troop members march up and down for weekly practice. The scouts insist the bagpipes' Scottish heritage translates perfectly to the Palestinian struggle for their own independence.
We play the Palestinian national anthem, Palestinian songs. We express our love for our country. We play the national anthem at every concert, and this is proof of our national pride and a way of expressing it.
The Scottish-Palestinian link has a history, with Palestinian flags flown at Glasgow's Celtic Park football stadium since the 1980s. Some Palestinians find the landmark referendum on the fate of the United Kingdom inspirational, as they play what they consider are the instruments of war.
Bagpipes express our culture, our heritage. This is music that you hear during public events and celebrations, and somehow it represents our culture.
As the Scots gear up for what appears to be a knife-edge vote, the supporters could perhaps sense the waves of solidarity thousands of kilometers away.
Yes, and now to sports. Guess who's with me tonight? It's I-24 News, sports magazine anchor Jonathan Regev. Good evening.
Evening, Lucy.
All good?
Everything is fine. Yourself?
Yeah. Although you have a private joke with the editor.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
It's okay. The next time that you will have a private joke, you're not entering this video.
Oh,
no! Yes. So let's talk about the new season in the Champions League.
Champions League. Are we expecting surprises? More teams coming and robbing the title?
Big teams.
No, we're not. Big teams once again. It will be Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, maybe Chelsea. Those are the big favorites. It's been a very long time since we saw a small team winning the title. Why is that?
Why is that?
It's all about the money. They have the big money. They can take the big players. Real Madrid spends every summer hundreds of millions of euros. Barcelona in the past, they say, well, you know, we grow our own players. Not anymore. They bring players with millions and millions as well. Let's speak first about Real Madrid. They are the defending champions. They face Basel tonight at home. They should not face any problems there. which they are in the domestic Spanish league. In La Liga, they lost 2 of the opening 3 matches. They lost to their city rivals, Atletico Madrid, just this past weekend. So it's not very good in the Spanish league. In the Champions League, at least at the beginning, they shouldn't have any trouble. Basel, relatively good team, not one that could cause trouble to Real Madrid.
Because I want to get to our third subject, let's go to the second. The Brits know how to respect their soldiers.
Yes, and they have created these games called Invictus Games. There's Olympics dedicated for military personnel injured while on their mission. Invictus, why Invictus? It means unbeatable in Latin. Those people may be hurt physically, but not mentally, not in spirit. And the Brits treated these games just as big as the Olympics game they held 2 years ago. This is the closing ceremony. It was a big deal. Bryan Adams was there. The Foo Fighters were there.
Bryan Adams was there?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything I do it for you. That's him, right?
Oh, Jonathan.
So good that I came. It was in the Olympic Park. You see in Stratford, the Brits did it. They do everything good, right?
Yeah.
But they do also funny stuff. You should hand it to them. How about a beard and mustache competition?
You know that we have only 25 seconds?
Beard and mustache competition. Plenty of categories.
Just show one frame.
Plenty of categories. They had symmetry, how long it is, how wide it is, and who is the man that won. His name is Mr. Taché. That's how he's called. I don't know why, but that's his name.
I don't
that's
like men with beards.
Especially the big beards, like this. But
I'm gonna do it for you. Jonathan. 2 minutes, and then the Daily Debate. Jonathan, thank you.
Bye-bye.